So let's see the parallels and comparison between doing something in graphical user interface and in a command line interface. So first of all, in a file explorer program of your operating system, you have this visual view of which folder you're in at the moment and which folders or files are inside that current directory. And you can do that in a command line interface as well. First of all, you can display which folder you are currently in. And this is the default folder that you are in when you open the terminal. And I can display that using a command called pwd, which basically means print working directory. And I'm going to execute, and you see that location that I'm in right now in my terminal. And that is the same as this location here, /home/nana. And we learned that in the previous file system lecture that every user has a folder in a home directory, and as a user nana, by default, I'm inside that directory in the graphical user interface as well as in terminal. Now, how can I display the folders or files which are in my current working directory? I can do that using ls, which basically means list, and enter, and I see the same list of folders right here. Currently, I don't have any files here, I just have folders. Now, what about going into a different directory? In graphical user interface, I can just click inside a folder and I'm inside documents directory now, right? In command line interface, it's also super easy. I just do cd, which means change directory, and then directory name, which is documents. And if I execute, now you see in the path here, before the cursor, now it shows ~/documents. And tilde is, as we learned already, is the same as, or it's a shortcut actually of this path here. So now if I do wpd, that's the location inside my operating system which I'm currently in. So using the cd command, I can actually navigate my file system by going up and down the file system hierarchy. In GUI, I can also create folders, right? So using this button here, let's say I want to create a folder for my application. And there you go. The same way I can create folders very easily in a command line interface. For that, I have a command called mkdir, which stands for make directory, and the directory name. Let's say we are creating a folder for a Python project. So I'm going to call this Python project. And now you see that we have another folder here. And the same way I can display the current list of folders inside the documents folder. Now, what about creating files in the directories? I'm going to go inside the web application, and to create a file in user interface, you would have some kind of editor. Like a simple text editor, doesn't matter. It could be also a document writer, and we're gonna write some text here and save it. And let's say this is a README file for our application, and save it. So in GUI, I have to open an editor, I have to save that file into a folder, etc. In command line, I can actually do that with one command. So first, I'm gonna go inside the Python project. And inside that, I'm going to create a file, and command for that is touch and then file name. And let's say this is a main.python file. This could be a text file, this could be HTML file, whatever you want. You just have this dot extension and it will create any type of file. So you don't need any editor for that. I'm gonna enter, and if I do ls, in Python project, I have this main.py file. And the same way I can remove files and folders. So if I want to remove this file, I can just do rm, which stands for remove, main.py, and there you go, the folder is empty. Now let's actually delete the Python project folder. Now, how do I navigate up the file system hierarchy? For that, with cd, I can do ... and that will basically take me one step or one level up the file system tree. So now I'm in the documents again, and if I want to remove the Python project, I can use the same remove command. Now, if I do remove Python project and execute, you see that it gives me a warning. Cannot remove Python project, it's a directory. So basically, when you're removing folders, not files, with the remove command, you have to add a flag here with -r. That stands for recursive. So basically, for folders, we want to recursively remove everything. So if I had other folders inside the Python project and files, all of them will be recursively removed. And enter. There you go. The Python project is gone. So this dash here with some character is actually a very common way to pass additional parameters to your command, right? To tell your command, hey, remove this folder, but do this recursively. And we're going to see some other examples of that later. In the previous video, we also checked out the directories in a root folder, right? So folders that are on the same level as the home directory. So if we needed to check some logs here, for system logs, or do something here, how do we actually navigate to the root folder from a command line interface? Well, the root folder in command line interface is actually represented with a character of /. And if I execute this, this will actually bring me to the root folder. And since we're at the bottom of the terminal window and we need some more space, I'm actually going to execute another command called clear. And this will clean up the terminal history and give us more space. So as you see here, we have, instead of tilde, we now have a /. And if I do pwd, we are in a root folder. And if I do ls here, it will show me all the folders inside the root directory. Now there is one interesting point about Linux, and that's that everything in Linux is actually a file. So obviously the text document or picture is a file, but also a directory is represented as a file. Linux commands that we are executing here, like pwd or ls or cd, these are all represented as binary files, which are located in one of those bin folders, either here or in user directory. The devices that you connect to your computer, like mouse, keyboard, USB, whatever, which are then shown in the dev folder, they're also represented as files. And since everything is a file in Linux, you can actually work with them just like files. You can copy them, you can move them from one place to another, you can show the contents of those files, etc. As I said, you shouldn't be changing anything here in the root directory, but just as an interesting info to be aware of. Now from command line, you can actually easily navigate the hierarchy of the file system through multiple layers. So for example, if I wanted to go to a bin folder in a user's local directory, I would have to basically follow this path. In command line, it's just one command, which basically lets you specify the whole path like this. So you have user folder, you have local inside, and you have bin. And if I do that, I'm inside that folder. Now, if I wanted to go back to the user folder, I could either do this, so basically move 2 hierarchies up the file system or do root folder user, and there you go. So basically from anywhere in your file system, you can specify an absolute path of any location. So for example, if I want to check my network configuration by providing what's called an absolute path. So absolute path is a term that's basically used for describing the complete path of any location. So basically, if I wanted to switch to the network folder inside etc, I can provide the absolute path that starts with root, and I will switch there. The same way I can go back to my home directory like this, or as we also learned, as a shortcut from anywhere in the file system, I can just do tilde. So with the tilde character, we can actually go back to our home directory. Now, one convenience of using an ls or list command is that we don't actually have to switch to another location to display the contents of a folder, right, of a directory. So for example, if I wanted to see the network configuration without actually switching to that folder and I wanted to stay in the home directory, I can just do ls/etc. Again, remember absolute path starting from the root folder /etc/network, and there you go. I'm still inside the home directory, but I can display files or contents from any other directory. Again, let's clean this up. And now let's actually move back to our documents folder with cd. And another great thing about command line is that when I type the first couple of letters, I can actually hit the tab key on my keyboard and it will actually show me all the folders that start with those letters. So right now I have documents and downloads, and if I do DOC and hit the tab again, it's gonna autocomplete that, right? So I don't have to remember or type out the folder names all the time. That's obviously helpful when navigating up and down the directories. So let's switch to the documents folder. And let's say we want to rename the web application folder to Java app because that's what we decided on as a name. So I want to change the name. For that, there is a command called mv, which actually stands for move. And we need an original name after that and the new name. So we are basically moving or changing web application to Java app. And I'm going to execute, and we have renamed the folder. And again, I can check the contents of that folder without entering it and with autocomplete. And let's say I have added some Java files here, create some application, and I actually want to keep a copy of this folder to create another project, another Java project based on that, right? So basically I want to copy the folder with all the contents. For that, I can do cp, which stands for copy, Java app, and let's call this something else, like my project. And again, we see the warning on folders. When we're copying a folder and it includes files or folders inside, we need to tell the copy command to do it recursively. Again, adding this -r flag. And if we do ls, and if we display my project, it should also have the README file copied from Java app. The same way we can actually copy and rename files. So first, let's say I want to create another copy of adjusted README. So let's say I want to have another README for test environment, right? Which has mostly the same thing, but I want to adjust it a little bit. So I can copy that with files. I don't need recursive because it's just one file. And now I have two files. And let's say I find just README confusing, so I want to rename that to readme dev, and there you go. So same commands for copying or renaming it. Cool, let's go back to our home directory and clear our window. And let's see some other cool and practical commands. So we already saw that with ls and the folder name, I can display directories in a certain location. Now let's say that I wanted to display these two folders, but I also wanted to display the contents inside those two folders. First of all, for that, I can add a flag here with minus, with dash, and that flag is a capital R this time, which again stands for recursive, and documents. And if I execute, you see that I see those directories inside, but per directory, I also see the contents inside Java app and my project as well. And again, that could be practical if you don't want to switch up and down and navigate up and down the directories. You just want to see everything in one display. Another cool thing with command line is that you don't have to retype everything all the time. With the arrow keys on your keyboard for up and down, you can actually navigate the commands from your history of command execution. So for example, if you want to execute a command from the previous execution again, you can just search it here in the history and execute it. And that brings us to another topic related to command line, which is a history of command line. By default, whatever commands you're executing in this window will be saved into a history file, right? So you have your command execution history. And if we type a command called history here, it will actually display us line by line all the commands that we executed in this session. And this could be very practical if, for example, you want to remember what you did on the command line, or maybe you want to remember the command that you executed and maybe copy that and execute it again. Another practical way of finding a command that you previously executed is by searching it on the command line. And you can do that by using a key combination on your keyboard, which will be Control and R. And this will give you a search input, so to say, reverse search, where you can type a command that you're looking for. For example, ls or cd, and I will see the commands that I executed that start with these characters. Let's also do rm. So that will be another convenient way of finding the old commands that you executed. Another useful key combination is whenever you want to break out of a command execution result, or you want to stop execution of something, a program here, then you can click Control C, and that will basically interrupt or kill the current process that is running in the terminal, like the search process right here. Another useful key combination is copying and pasting in the terminal. So let's say you want to find a command that shows you the last 20 commands in your history of command execution. By default, if I do history, you get all your commands. Let's say you only want to display last 20, or let's say last 10. And let's say you search that in a browser, history last 10 commands, and you find the answer on a Stack Exchange, whatever, and you copy that. Obviously, this is much more practical if it's a long command. In this case, you would just copy that, and now you want to paste it in your terminal. For that, you're going to use Control, Shift, and V, and this will paste whatever you copied inside the terminal. And obviously, this will be very practical if you have much larger commands, much longer commands that you don't want to retype here. And this will give us last 20 commands. And one final command is displaying hidden files. In the file system lecture, you already learned that in your home directory, you usually have hidden files that you can display like this. And these are basically all sorts of hidden files or hidden folders that different programs and applications generate to store their configuration there or to store binaries or whatever. And sometimes you may need to look inside them or navigate them or check some stuff. For example, one of the hidden files here, which is called bash history, actually contains the history of your commands that we outputted right here. So there will be enough use cases for navigating through and displaying the hidden files and directories. So how do we access them or how do we see them in a terminal? And that's actually pretty easy. So I'm in the home directory where I have a bunch of hidden files, and if I want to display them, I'm gonna pass in an argument with -a. And if I execute, this will actually show me all the files and folders, including the hidden ones. In the same way as I navigate in these other directories, I can navigate in the hidden folders like this and display the contents of the folder. So we know how to display the contents of a folder, but how do we display contents of a file, whether it's a hidden file or a regular file? In graphical user interface, you just click on the file and it basically shows you the contents like this. In terminal, it's actually also very easy. You just do CAT, which actually stands for concatenate. It's a fancy word for combining words together, and that's the command we use to display file contents. So in this case, let's display bash, and let's do tab for completion. And we can display contents of regular files the same way. Let's do Java app and readme. And there you go. Now, all these commands that we just saw in this lecture, these super basic commands for working with files and folders and navigating the file system, these commands are actually the ones you are going to be using most of the time. So people usually think that to be good at Linux, you have to memorize tons of different commands. And in reality, you have these around 20 commands maybe that you have to know and which you will be using most of the time. And the rest of the commands, either you're never gonna use them, or if you need them once in a while, you can just basically Google that or look that up. So you don't have to memorize hundreds of commands because you're just gonna be working with a handful of them. So with these basic commands, you can actually already do a lot in Linux. Also, some people may think at the beginning, why would you use command line interface when you have a graphical user interface, which is more visual and much easier to navigate and use? Well, first of all, if you get used to the command line interface, you can actually work much more efficiently and much quickly because you don't have to click through all these folders and applications and stuff. You have everything in just one window, right? In one terminal, and you just basically execute commands inside that, right? So you save a lot of time, and some commands actually make it easier, certain stuff, than if you did them on a graphical user interface. Another advantage of command line is that if you are doing some bulk operations on your files or folders, so basically you are changing a lot of stuff at the same time, you can do that much easier on a command line interface through a command than doing that through a GUI. Like bulk creating folders, files, renaming them, or moving stuff around, command line interface may actually be much easier for that. And finally, command line interface can actually do more than graphical user interface. So command line is actually much more powerful than graphical user interface And also for certain repetitive tasks or bulk commands, you can actually do that faster in the terminal than in the GUI. This could be updating or moving 100 files or renaming them, etc. But of course, there are tasks where you can't replace the graphical user interface with the command line. And these are visual tasks like editing images or videos or browsing internet. Obviously, you would do that with a graphical user interface. Now, in addition to working with files and folders, you can also use command line interface to display some really useful information about your operating system. So for example, with one command, you can display all the information about the kernel, its version, which distribution, etc. you're using. With uname-a, this will give us the complete information, which kernel, kernel version, computer name, etc. So you get all this information here. You can also display operating system release like this by reading the file contents of /etc/os release file. And this will basically tell you this is an Ubuntu distribution with this version. You can also check information about your hardware. So for example, if I want to check CPU information for my system, I can do ls, which is command we already learned, and CPU. And this will give you detailed info about the architecture that you're using, how many CPUs you have, how many cores, which model it is, etc. And the same way you can display memory information like this. So you have the total memory that your system is using, etc. And know that obviously this is the memory that we allocated when we created the virtual machine, which is 2 GB, and you see that information here. So basically, in addition to these very common and basic commands, you have a bunch of these other commands which are also useful if you want to get some more information about your system, etc. But again, as I said, you're not going to be using these type of commands very often maybe. So whenever you need them, you can actually look them up so you don't have to memorize all the commands. And finally, the last important concept with commands that we need to cover is executing commands as a super user. If you remember, in the file system lecture, we learned that in /sbin folder, we have all these commands that are meant for super user execution, right? Administrators would basically use these commands to administer the system. Some of them are managing users or managing some network configuration, etc. And as I said, to execute these commands, we actually need super user privilege. So one of these commands is add user. Let's clear this up. And let's do add user. And this command actually takes a parameter, which is just a username. Let's do admin. And if I execute this, you see a warning that says only root may add a user or group to the system, which means we can't execute that as a regular non-root user, right? Which we are logged in as now. So to be able to do that from my Nana user, what I can do is at the beginning, I can add something called sudo. And this basically tells the system that I want to temporarily, just for this one command, become a super user to be able to execute this command. And now if I execute this, you see that it's asking me for my password. I'm gonna type that in. So it's authenticating me. And you see the output, which is adding user admin. So it has added the user with name admin. It has added the user in that group, and now it's asking me for the password for that new user. Let's type in whatever password, doesn't matter, and retype that. Let's call it admin. Leave all the defaults, say yes, and our admin user was created. And if I check the contents of home directory, I should actually see a new folder that was created for the admin user, which is empty for now except for some hidden files. So whenever you get this warning or you know that you're executing a command that needs user privilege, you can add sudo at the beginning, and it tells the system that you want to become super user for that one specific command. And note that once you authenticate yourself with the password, it's going to save that authentication data. So if I execute another command with sudo, it will not ask for my password again, which is obviously convenient because you don't want to type in password every time you want to execute a command with sudo. So for example, if I did a group here, and let's call this DevOps group, you see that it created the group without asking for a password. Now, obviously, because we have another user now, we could log into our operating system with admin user and its password. The same way we can actually switch the user in the command line terminal as well. So now if I wanted to log in as an admin user in my session, so switch from Nana to admin in my terminal, I can do su dash and name of the user I want to switch to. And this will ask me for password of the admin user because I'm trying to log in as one. And let's type that in. And you see that right here. And if I do pwd, I'm inside /home/admin. And again, I can switch back to my user like this. And now it's asking me for Nana user's password, and there you go. Again, very convenient if you want to, or if you need to switch between users on one computer. You don't have to log out and log in. You basically just do everything in the terminal. And the final interesting small detail here is that if I close the terminal and open it again, I still have my history of the commands that I executed here. History. And the same way, using these arrows, I can basically navigate to my old commands. And once I close the terminal, all of these actually got stored in bash history file. And we want to display the contents of the file. And all the commands are right here. Again, pretty useful if you want to remember what you actually did on the system and what commands you executed. So these were the basics of command line interface and Linux commands. This should give you a really good foundational knowledge about how to work with the command line interface. And in the next sections, we're gonna build on that knowledge and learn even more commands and more concepts.